Alright, so there's actually going to be 2 review videos this week, with The House with a Clock in Its Walls and a few others tomorrow. But in the meantime, I figured we would go through these, which I've been catching up on over the last week or so. I, I guess we're going to start with Mandy, um, where it's also had like a small release in theaters, but also had a VOD release as well. So, there's been a lot of hype for like 9 months because of Sundance. When it came out there, pretty much everybody was talking about it. I watched like a shitload of Cage interviews talking about it at that time, having no idea when I'd actually see it, or when it was supposed to come out or anything like that. I figured I'd just come across it eventually, like I do most of his other movies. But this one kind of seemed to be a bit more, I guess, above that. Like, this was because if you've been keeping up with this at all over the last 5.5 years I've been doing this, I have pretty much constantly just praised Nicolas Cage in every aspect, whether the movie be terrible or straight to DVD or whatever, because I've always just kind of been in love with his kind of go big or go home style, regardless of what the environment is or whether the environment even calls for it. Just the fact that he will go all out like that no matter what the project is, despite the fact that he's been the butt of a lot of jokes because of his, financial situation or whatever, leading to many of the movies he's been in lately. Even the really, really bad stuff like Looking Glass, I just always find myself there. I seek those movies out. Like I said, regardless if they're straight to video or anything, just because I want to see what he's going to do next. So, needless to say, there was... Now, given the fact that people were actually finally having that reaction, like in bulk, um, in a positive way, when it came to this movie, it had, like, to me, like, a lot to live up to. Like, I was actually starting to get scared of the hype. Because it's like, I really should stop listening to this, because this is, like, how I've always kind of looked at him, even in the shitty movies, and now everybody's saying that not only is he that, but he has amplified that even further for this, because the movie is just crazy enough to call for that. So, and the fact that, like, this movie is so big and so crazy in that regard that it's pretty much impossible for him to... It would have been impossible for him to overdo it. It's like he found the perfect stride here. He found the perfect level of crazy to go, but it's like it felt like there could not have possibly been a limit because what this movie was offering to him. So, and of course, the director did make a previous movie, Beyond the Black Rainbow. His father might be more well known because his dad made a few, before I think dying of lung cancer, I can't remember how long ago, but made a few more mainstream movies. Like, I think he did Rambo 2 and Cobra, and he's the credited director on Tombstone. And it's like, this is like a totally different direction. You can see obvious influence, from like 80s era movies, maybe like those, to an extent. But clearly something totally different. Not just from those movies, but from really any movie. Even movies that tackle this territory. Like, when you're first kind of watching it and you see the build-up and the introduction of the villains, and by the way, this is me basically saying, like, this is like the absolute most vague, just straightforward summary possible, because you could give, like, a whole layout of this movie from beginning to end in maybe a minute, if that. And it's like, and this movie is just like 1 minute over 2 hours. And it's like, watching it, you understand that, because it's like, to just say what the movie is and like what happens in it, even the crazy shit, even saying what happens in it, as far as like, if you say like there's a sword fight in it, but it's not swords, it's chainsaws and stuff like that, and that's just like one thing out of like a billion, it still does not quite do anything for the person hearing that unless they've seen it. Because it's just this whole combination of the visuals and Jan Johansson's score and the performances. So, like I said, so you could say, like, if you're watching it and you see the basic structure, you'll think of stuff like I Spit on Your Grave and Last House on the Left and stuff like that, and, you know, all the 80s movies that use, like, neon and shit. Um, but still, it's just, like, I struggle to even, like, I almost gave up, like, even doing this. Like, as much as it, you know, amps me up to talk about Nicolas Cage movies in general, I felt like this one went so beyond that. It was like, how do you even talk about this? All you can really say is, holy shit, and then say the things that happen in it, and you'd be making your point. Like, that would probably be all you'd need to get out how you feel about this movie, but, so yeah, I wasn't even sure I could do this. Like, it's kind of how I felt about, when I was kind of nervous about doing a review like this for the Neon Demon, because it was like I really wasn't sure going in what I was going to say. I just kind of had to figure it out while I was talking to the camera. That's basically what's happening now. I don't really know how else to go into this. So, and I guess that kind of expectation I set for myself, because, like I said, I'm just so into talking about my love for Nicolas Cage movies and just how big and crazy they are, and it's like how this is just like the ultimate. It's almost like it's way too above me to be able to even do this, but yeah. But basically, what really kind of sets it off is it is calm for a little bit. Just a little bit, when we see the relationship between him and Mandy, who is Andrea Riseborough, and how there's definitely a romance here, if a very offbeat one. And there is some dialogue here. It's throughout, but it's a lot of the dialogue's in the first half, because the second half is way too busy doing other shit. But the thing about it, though, especially, like, because people pop up that he has, like, one scene dialogues with, like, Bill Duke and Richard Brake, but the thing about the dialogue in this is it's probably many times been easily dismissed as very shitty dialogue. And it's like, and people often dismiss that. They'll probably think it's fine because that's not what the movie's about. But I think the thing that struck me about the dialogue was the fact that, not just the fact that it's, like, you know, not great dialogue or anything, but it's almost like, sort of like the movie's speaking its own language, where it's like, whenever, like, the dialogue is sparse, but anytime somebody does say something, it's in such this off way, and almost, in some cases, maybe a bit nonsensical, that it's like, it feels like its own language, because it's like, it may come out of their mouths and we're thinking, what the fuck? But the person that's being spoken to seems to understand. Like, it's part of this world, and something that we as the audience aren't really as familiar with as the characters in this movie. It's like it's in its whole own world. And it's like, it does make sense between them, even though we'd be looking at it thinking stuff like, oh, the dialogue's shitty or something like that. That's the way I took that anyway. But yeah, overall, though, it's also has a lot to do with the fact that the dialogue's just really not important. They could have taken out, like, every line of dialogue, and they would have told the story visually just fine. So, and like I say, it feels like they almost do that anyway, but yeah, they do lead this relatively peaceful existence, despite the fact that he's clearly... There's something a little off about her, but it seems there's mostly an innocence when you... at least when you compare it to the other characters in the movie. But he clearly comes from some kind of dark place, we eventually learn. But in the meantime, this does feel just like a really sort of calm and tranquil life that they live together. And that's shown in some of these images, like this incredibly unreal, amazing shot of them, like, on a boat in, like, just the way the water looks. Like I said, it's not even something you can really explain what this movie looks like. But it's stuff like that. It really, like I said, just gives you all the emotion you need just in these shots alone. But then, as this is going on, despite how peaceful and tranquil it seems, the score is doing its job in regards to setting up what's eventually going to happen. Obviously, we already know that, but, like, the score is almost like Jaws. Not like the score from Jaws, but like the shark in Jaws, where it's like, it's there, and it's, like, lingering, and we know that something bad is coming, just kind of from the distance and getting closer and closer to us. Even if the scene, even with what's happening on the screen, seems calm, the score is doing its job of letting us know that it's about to not be calm. So that's really great as well. And then there's even also kind of that bit of contrast in regards to when the movie's reached its, you know, really awful things will happen point to the life they were leading up to that point, when after the key moment in the middle of the movie that sets the second half off has happened, and Cage goes into their bathroom without his pants, with blood all over him, and he's drinking and screaming in that Nicolas Cage way, sort of like just kind of letting it all out in the way that he would have, like, in Vampire's Kiss, when he just completely let go. And it's this surprisingly dramatic scene that almost seems like it's going to be like it's the Cage rage we all want to see scene, but then it's actually this really deeply emotional thing. And while what I just said is happening, the look of the bathroom in this scene is, like I said, it's very hard to explain, but it's definitely a contrast to what's happening to him in the scene, despite being the background of this moment. It's almost like, it's like a Wes Anderson set or something. And so that's kind of ingenious. But then, as it goes on, also, it's just sort of, they really go for, like, the drug trip thing, like the LSD thing, particularly in the Linus Roche scenes, who's playing, like, the main villain, the leader of the cult that does all this horrible shit. And there's one particular scene where it's like, I don't even know if it's trying to say something, it's just a trippy-ass scene. And that's really all it needs to be in the moment, the way it's sort of sucking you into this, and sort of this power of seduction that his character has, where it's just a big-ass close-up of his face in this red light, and as he's speaking to her, it, like, dissolves into her face, and then back into... And this happens many times, to where after a while, you're not sure anymore which one of them you're looking at. I mean, the giveaway, I guess, is that his mouth is moving, but sometimes on her still face, you can still kind of see his mouth moving vaguely. It's... I'm amazed I could explain that this far. I don't know how else to put that, but that's just... It's stuff like that. Like I said, even if it doesn't have a purpose, if it's just here to sort of, you know, give you that feel of, like, you're in a totally different place or something totally disorienting, either way it's doing its job. So, there's that. And we do have, there's also some stuff like some of the shots, like, eventually, Cage, like, makes his own gigantic axe as if he's going into battle. That's this really fucking crazy looking thing. You can already just, like, smell the blood that's going to drench this thing when you see it after it's just been freshly made, before he even takes it out. But that's the thing, is when he does, it's like, this thing is so fucking huge and has that really new sort of shine to it because he just made it from nothing. There's a big overhead shot of him riding through, like, the woods on this path, where it's just, like, endless trees, and just, as, like, a speck on this path, you can see the entire, like, you can see the axe from this angle, that far away. And just shit like that is insane. But, going on this also, another interesting path it takes is, I was talking about how it has, like, this whole otherworldly vibe to it. Well, they start to take that pretty literally, because there are these other characters introduced that Linus Roche and his dudes have summoned, and they're on bikes, and they look like somewhere in between Mad Max and Hellraiser, is somewhere where these dudes came from. And it's sort of like, they do have this demonic quality to them, to where it's implying that they came, like, straight from hell, but then there's also a bit of ambiguity. It's like, maybe they're a human biker gang we just don't get a very good look at, that are just in really elaborate get-ups, or they could be creatures from an unknown area also. And it's like, when you start to distinguish which is which, it's like, when he kills them, like when he stabs one or, like, you know, cuts one's head off or something, it's like a fountain of blood. It's like Kill Bill blood. But when you see its blood, you're like, oh, okay, either they're inhuman because they just bleed in fountains, or they're human because it's actual blood. But then when he kills some of the human characters in this gang that we know are human, they bleed in a similar fashion. It's just all very over the top. And then it's like, okay, maybe that's not even saying that, this is, by the way, overanalyzing it, it really does not matter, but, it is sort of like, if they bleed in the same way those things do, does that mean those things are human? Or is that showing that the cultists might as well be inhuman as well? Just sort of... These are just things that went through my head looking at this. Sort of after the fact. I don't really recall anything going through my head during. This is all sort of after the fact. Like, it's sort of useless to try when you're actually watching it, unless you're seeing it for like a second or third time. But the first time, you just kind of gotta let it go. And you just kind of let it do its whole thing, and then, like, hardly even try to think about it until afterwards, is all you can really do. And so, like, and there's also, I don't really buy much into this for, like, pretty much any movie, unless that's the point, and that is, seems to be, and maybe this is me catching stuff maybe that's not even the point, maybe I've seen too many movies that have tried something like this, but, a bit of a religion theme. Because, I mean, of course, you've got a cult, so naturally there's going to be some sort of religion-type thing, whatever that may be. Maybe even a fictional one or whatever, but, there's stuff like the way they show, the year at the beginning, and these really wicked title cards, and when it tells you the year it's set in, which I think is 1983, it says AD with it. And that's something you just kind of think, okay, that's stylish, let's keep going. But then there's like this whole, I gotta say, there seems to be like a hell and demons thing happening here a little bit. And then I guess you could, if there's one thing that is way, way overplayed in movies that I just could not give one possible shit about, it's whenever there's like a Jesus allegory, because I feel like every fucking buddy is doing that anymore in any context. But I suppose there is something here with the Cage character in that. Like, not just that, you know, he basically gets tortured and then stabbed and all that, but then when he comes back for revenge, it's like a resurrection of sorts. And I could have sworn there was one moment where he had a flashback or something, and in like one split second, there's a shot of him, like, head on, and behind him, it's, like, yellow and orange, sort of like those famous pictures of Jesus that you see, and it's, like, for, like, a split second. So it's like, there might be a Jesus thing in there somewhere, but I don't really care. So, it's just, I'm so tired of that, so take that for what you will. So, yes, that's the best I can really do talking about this, without actually just saying, just go see the thing, because whatever I say is not going to do it justice, but whatever anybody says is not really going to do it justice. You just have to see it. Even if that's, like, even if you don't like it, I still find it hard to... I mean, I guess I can kind of imagine what somebody would say if they didn't like it, and I probably would have a hard time arguing with them. I mean, clearly I don't agree, but it's like, it's one of those things where if somebody were to come up to me and say they hated this movie with every fiber of their being, it would be very easy to understand. It's like, I wouldn't even try to argue with them. It's like, I get it. I totally get it. But, yeah, but regardless, it seems to be working for most people. I feel like it's got practically an instant classic status. It sort of felt like that as soon as it came out of Sundance. And now that, like, everybody's getting to see it now, and it's like, it just seems to be getting bigger, and this is going to be talked about, and it's amazing that we finally found a Cage movie that most of us can agree on to do this with. And of course it's the one that just really tests to see just how far he can go. Like, he mentioned once recently about, like, the only thing that, like, ever really put him off to where he didn't do it was, there was a Paul Schrader script that he had asked him to do, where it was basically, the way he described it was like the first 5 minutes of what Willem Dafoe does in Dog Eat Dog, only the whole movie. And it's like he had to turn that script down because it was too much. So, to give you, this is probably, like, right there, even though because he was apparently offered the Linus Roche part, but he really, really wanted to play the lead character, and you can really see that there's, not only did he see something that he could just really go off the wall crazy for, but there was, like, a real connection he had with the character, like, emotionally, not just being able to just basically be unleashed. Which, as we all know, is the best cage in any environment, but when there's a movie that actually suits it almost too well, there's gonna be magic. Severe, sadistic, crazy-ass, blood-soaked magic. So, there it is. So, let's move on to all the other underwhelming movies that have to follow that. Let's talk about Slice, I guess. This is a movie by A24, which obviously has a really nice reputation for these really great artistic movies. But every now and then they have a movie like Cut Bank or Dark Places that's just really... it's fun. It's like when A24 reaches its highs, they are like so high. But it's like when A24 goes low, it's like they go really fucking low, like on purpose. Like they want to be one extreme or the other. So what this was built up to be for a while, I saw way too much promotion for this online. But it was basically building itself up as this horror comedy with this sort of, crazy other world starring, of all people, Chance the Rapper. And they were building that up like it was a big fucking deal that he was in this. And it's like, yeah, because when I think of Chance the Rapper, I think this must be cinematic gold guaranteed. I don't know what the fuck that was about, but, yeah, so they want to set up their own world here, where we're basically coexisting with ghosts and witches and werewolves. But of course, it's an allegory. Because that's really popular now. We got it with orcs in Bright, and we got it with puppets and the Happy Time Murders, and that's just a couple. This is a very in thing to do right now, and this movie feels so far behind that kind of stuff. If this feels like what, and obviously, Bright and the Happy Time Murders are not, the fucking end-all be-all of anything, let alone an allegory. So that's about the whole, shortcut version is racism, but all the other, yeah, but they're basically trying to do that with the way the ghosts are like segregated and they're looked down on and they have their own little ghettos and all that. The ghosts, they're ghosts, but they look like they're wearing, like, cheap zombie makeup. Like, when I first saw them, I thought they were zombies until they kept saying ghosts over and over again. I was also sort of getting vibes of... Another movie people tend to like that I didn't really was Odd Thomas, the Stephen Sommers movie with Anton Yelchin. It feels like it's kind of in that territory also, only worse. Slice is worse. So, it seems that... pizza delivery boys around this fictional city are being murdered. And this one, it's really set off by this one particular pizza boy who's played by the writer and director, who, to my understanding, was like, hasn't really done much except Chance the Rapper music videos. What a fucking surprise. So, it starts with him getting his throat slit. I was going to make a little joke here about when he died in the first scene, and he's the writer and director, and it was like, oh, so he's doing it before the critics can do it to him, haha. But then I look it up, and apparently a lot of the critics actually like this, which is baffling, but maybe I'll go read those reviews afterwards and see what I missed. But in the meantime, I will tell you that this is, like... If I've already said that the casting is a bit off. We do have some promising people in here, like Zazie Bates from Atlanta and Deadpool 2 is basically our lead. And we have Paul Scheer as the dude that runs the pizza place. Chris Parnell is the mayor. There's some people that, you know, there's like an inkling of promise here, but the problem is that one of the problems is that basically every character in this movie is obnoxious to a horrible degree, and what makes that worse is that's apparently where a lot of the comedy is supposed to come from. Is the characters just kind of acting in these very hammy, over-the-top ways, because the whole movie's basically trying to be hammy and over-the-top with this sort of concept, and be just this sort of silly almost. I'm not even sure what. I feel like they're trying to do an era. I just can't figure out what era that is. Or if it's trying to be its own thing, that ship long since sailed. There is like there's a slightly entertaining sort of animated credit sequence at the beginning that gives you the vibe that this probably could have been a fun movie at some point, but they lost their way trying to be funny and failing. But also, it's another one of those cases where they have they're trying to do the whole world building thing, but there's just so many problems with this. There's the whole thing about, it's a whole big deal that people are getting killed. It's about finding out who's killing these people. But doesn't really feel like that big of a deal when people instantly come back as ghosts, and they still are characters in the movie. They still live, but they're just ghosts now. Like I said, you may be in a minority, but even so, there's no real stake here. And they're not really... And it's like, maybe that's supposed to be funny, I don't know. But the thing also is that it seems to really depend on how important you are, character-wise, as to how long it takes you to come back as a ghost. Like, if you're a major character, you will instantly become a ghost. If you're like a side character nobody gives a shit about, it's going to be a long-ass time before you're a ghost, and it's going to be important later. So, so that's just all fucked up from the get-go. And like I said, I guess it's intentionally trying to be over the top. But when it's just never... I'm trying to think of like one funny line. It is very short. It's like an hour 20 something. But there was just an absolute absence of laughs. But it's one of those movies where you can tell they were trying really hard through the whole thing. And I could see maybe somebody finding this clever or finding it like the stupid kind of funny. But I just wasn't finding that at all. And it really doesn't help at all that it looks like... I mean, you look at like the stuff that Blumhouse does, where they take like... They have these really, really low budgets, but they do like everything with it. And they make everything come to life in this really nice way. And you don't... It doesn't even occur to you, unless you're thinking about it, how low budget they are. But this movie looks so goddamn cheap from beginning to end. And once again, maybe to some people that'll be part of its charm. But, I mean, this looked lazily cheap. Like I said, when it's, there was a movie shot around here a few years ago that I actually did one of these videos for. And when I did that, I talked about the fact that it basically looked like when somebody was playing a zombie, or in this movie, a ghost. It literally looked like they just sat in a lawn chair, got 2 hits of makeup on them, and then were pushed into the movie. Voila, you're a zombie. This looks like that. And then, eventually, it's built up through the whole movie. Like, they really, really build it up through the whole movie that at some point, Chance the Rapper is going to be a werewolf. Whether we like it or not. And after a whole movie of build-up, when this finally happens, it is shocking how shitty this looks. Like I said, I know. I know it's low budget. I know it's an intentionally silly movie. But it is embarrassing how shitty this looks. And that's the cherry on top. Like, that's what the movie's been building to, is what this scene was gonna be when he finally turns into a werewolf. And it's like, that pretty much just sums up the whole movie. It's like, if that's what you spend the whole movie waiting for, what do you think the rest of the movie is? You can probably guess. So, and also, when I talk about, like, the whole allegory thing feels way overplayed and stuff like that, there's also, like, the whole ghost thing where, like, you immediately come back as a ghost. If that sounds a little familiar, yeah, I was getting some serious Idle Hands vibes. And in not in the, oh hey, this is like Idle Hands, how great sort of way. It was like the, well, this is a fucking ripoff of Idle Hands, isn't it? Sort of way. Because Idle Hands is like funny. That's the start. That's where this movie should have started, but unfortunately, it's just kind of all shitty from beginning to end. And there's way I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but there's way too many characters. And there are characters like that are like front and center, like the reporter, where she's there, but she's basically there to just kind of observe what's happening. She doesn't really drive anything, and it's like she's a major character this entire movie could do without. Like there's really no need for her to be here at all. And then there's like there's the one of the kids from Stranger Things is in it. As another very throwaway part that seems like he might be close to a character or two, but just ultimately doesn't matter. And then there is like a dealer named Big Cheese, who's played by the guy from the first Purge, because a dealer named Cheese, apparently Method Man wasn't available. Chance the Rapper obviously was, but Method Man had better things to do. So, like, better things to do than doing a movie with Chance the Rapper. That's the key thing here. So, yeah, and then it has basically, they do some twist that really doesn't matter whatsoever, and if anything, it makes a character you already kind of wanted to see die, it just make you want them to die more. And without the satisfaction, just because you want this character to end, but there's still no, it's not like Marcia Gay Harden in The Mist, there's no satisfaction. So, it's just what happens. And then it just ends so incredibly abruptly. It was like the makers of the movie wanted it to end as fast as I did. It's like it just quits very quickly. So I guess technically that could be a compliment, that it ended as quickly as it could. But it still just made it feel just as messy and shitty as it did all the other way through. So yeah, that's all there is to that. So let's move on to a totally different area we've been talking about, Papillon. This is the remake of the 1973 movie with Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman. And this is a case of, like many times before I've stated that I'm not anti-remake. I'm really not. Like, I've explained this many times over, so I don't need to go all into it, but point being, I'm not anti-remake. But this was a movie where when I saw the casting is fine. Charlie Hunnam and Rami Malek. When I saw Rami Malek on the poster, I was like, wow, he's really going for the Dustin Hoffman thing, holy shit. But, still, like, of all movies, this was one where, like, even the most forgiving person, like, even the biggest remake apologist, would think about Papillon being remade in 2018 and be asking why. Like, what do we have to gain from this? What do we have to add to it? So, what do they have to add to it? Well, they actually add to it, for better or worse. Like, they're adding to it, at least, whether it's necessary or not, because when it opens, we're seeing his life before he went to prison, when the original movie just starts in the prison. We never really see outside of it either, except the escape sequences. And it's kind of like a bookend thing, like how when the original movie ended, it was just, he just floated off and it ended. Here we do get like an epilogue and all that too, but we also have this prologue where he's not in prison. And it's like, this could go either way. This could be really interesting for this character. It could explore him in different ways we didn't get to when McQueen did it. Or it could just be totally pointless and not add anything whatsoever. That's pretty much what it is, the latter. Where it's like, we really, like, they could have done something interesting with this, but, you know, it's probably exactly what you expect it to be. It's trying to be a little lively about it, but it's not really there. It still feels flat anyway, and it's, like I said, there's nothing they show that couldn't have been said in 2 lines of dialogue, like was done in the original movie, but what's really funny about that is it's like, I felt like the movie knew. feel like the movie knew it needed to start in the prison, because it's actually not the very first moment of the movie he's outside the prison. No, the very first moment of the movie is one of those things where he's in confinement, if you'll remember. And that's the opening scene. It's doing that thing where, hey, this is the start of it, this is where he is, and we're going to come back to this. So it does technically start in the prison, but it's like, they should have just taken that idea. It's like, they obviously put that scene here, they started that with that for a reason. And it's like, well, we need to show inside the prison first. It's like, well, maybe you should have just stayed inside the prison to begin with and just gone from there. Then, voila, you've done both. And we don't have all this extra shit that really doesn't matter, because it doesn't really add anything to his characters. And maybe it does a little bit in showing, like, somewhat of a change. Like, to kind of show that he's not the person in prison that he is on the outside, and how he's... Like, the things that he is able to do and finds that he's capable to do in prison, the guy outside of prison probably wouldn't have realized it before he went in. You get maybe the slightest hint of that, to the point that, like I said, it still really doesn't matter that they even put those scenes in. So, and it's like 10 or 15 minutes, and they've cut, you know, about 20 minutes off the movie. The original is, what, 2.5 hours? This one's about 2:15. So... which is still long for this movie. This one feels a lot longer, because that's the thing, is the original movie feels so incredibly epic. Like, it feels so big and like such a journey for this character. This movie just feels long. not in that big, extravagant way. But I'll get more into that too. But the one thing I did want to mention was, it did feel like they might have been taking an interesting direction here, because obviously... not only the original movie, but this also come from the memoirs. Like, there was, like, him, and I think it's sort of melded from, like, people he was in the prison with also, and I think there's, like, people aren't quite sure if it's all from his perspective or whose perspective, what exactly, but somehow the stories of whoever came together and got this story into one cohesive piece. And so it comes to adapting that also. Like, you could take the Coen Brothers approach, when it's like, nobody considers the Coen Brothers True Grit a remake of John Wayne's movie. They consider it strictly an adaptation of the novel that just happens to have another movie made about it. And what they did here was they hired a director that's, if you look at his resume, there's not much there, but you'll see a fair amount of documentaries. It's like, okay, so you've got this actual story based on these memoirs. A documentarian's an interesting way to go. And it does kind of have a similar feel to that, like when you watch the end credits. They have, like, these stills that have that sort of feel to it. It's like stills you would see in a documentary of this story or something. But that doesn't seem to have added anything. It doesn't really have much more of a... sort of a different feel. It's like, I mean, they do have some things here that they've done well, but like I said, it all sort of comes back, and I hate to do that thing again where it's like, this is basically nothing more than, this is what the original movie did, this is what this movie did. But that's the problem, is this movie just struggles so hard to stand on its own that you're not really left with much else to say, except to say, this is how they did it, and how did it compare to when they did it. So you've got stuff that you sort of think maybe the movie won't stick to, like take the confinement scene, for instance, because one of the big upsides of the original movie was, despite, you know, starring, like, an action icon like Steve McQueen, and having a 2.5-hour runtime, it's amazing how little dialogue there is in the original movie. And it's like, is a movie in 2018 really going to be able to really be able to appreciate that and try it out? And they do the confinement scene fine. There are moments that, throughout the movie, they don't really stick. That's something where I would have kind of liked to have seen them do that, even if it's a looser situation, because even if they had done it, it would have been like, they still would feel too close to the original movie, but it's, even trying, you know, to not go that route as much, particularly in, like, the tribe scene. Like, I don't really remember much dialogue at all in the tribe scene in the original movie, but, the tribe and the nuns in this pretty much happen simultaneously, like, instantaneously with each other. So that whole segment is just gone. So that sort of takes a bit of an artistic quality out of it that was initially in it. when you should be adding that shit or making it your own in some way, for the better, not the other way, but, yeah, but when you see, like, the confinement scene, they do stick with that. They stay inside. We do watch him pretty much go insane. It doesn't get as, like, into, like, hallucinations as the original movie did, which maybe it could have had fun with on its own, but not really. And then it's like, just when it accomplishes enough to where you're like, obviously the original did it better, but at least they seem to have tried to get there. But even then, it's like, this is such, because the original movie is 73, we've had so many movies sort of in this territory since. This is going to feel like movies that the original movie didn't have to compete with. So, like, when you watch Charlie Hunnam in confinement for 2 years, like, starving and, like, losing himself and all that, it feels like something out of Hunger. Steve McQueen's movie, weirdly enough, Steve McQueen's movie with Michael Fassbender. So that's, so yeah, and there's a, and when it's like him basically going through this, when you see Charlie Hunnam, really committing to this and going through, like, the physical transformation, going through all these hardships, all this physical stuff just really beating down on him, you're just reminded of stuff like Unbroken. And it's like, it not only can it not get out of the shadow of the original movie, but it's put itself in the shadow of other movies, since, like, recent movies, very recent movies. So that's gonna put you in a corner also. And it's like, seems like it's straying farther and farther away from becoming its own thing when that kind of stuff happens. So, and there's some stuff even where, like I said, it's like a lose-lose thing, because, like, there are some things where you have one of the most interesting scenes of the original movie that's cut out of this entirely, like the leper colony. It was like one of the first things I actually thought when I saw, like, this was being made, and I saw, like, the poster for it and all that. The release was very abrupt. It was like, hey, here's a poster, and hey, here's a trailer, and it's like really sudden. But when I first heard that, like, one of my first thoughts was, I had a feeling. I just had a feeling they weren't going to have the leper colony scene. So yeah, like, that's something they could have maybe, like, you can make that scene longer than it is in the original movie. You could really, have fun with that, especially between the two characters, but, the sharing the cigar and all that, but it just acts it completely. Just, no. So that sucks. But there are things that do help. Like, the production design is, like, really good. Like, you've got how when you're in the prison and everything's, like, really dirty and just, like, the color is just, like, drained from it, and you just get this really, just gritty feel to it. But then when you see, like, the escape scenes, or you see, like, the background, and you see, like, the sort of tropical areas, and it's like, those colors, like, really stand out in a really bright way, especially in the contrast of the prison scenes, and it makes the escape sequences feel all the more like the paradise of freedom is there. It makes it more like you're craving for it more, just as much as the characters are. Stuff like that does work. And like I said, Charlie Hunnam's commitment to, like, the physicality of the role and all that is working, but there's just still, Rami Malek, like I said, it is nice. Like, as soon as I saw him, it was like, he's definitely going for the Hoffman thing, but it's still, like, he's very, it's one of those performances where it's like, you can really see the wheels turning with, like, every move and every take and all that. So yeah, in small doses, though, he had found something that he could, work with, but it's, like I said, it felt very, predetermined, I guess, going in, but you could actually, like, see it all that, so yeah. But it is a movie you can compliment for, not doing things. Like, you could easily see this, like, go on full action movie or something. I'm actually kind of surprised they didn't do that. So like I said, with them, the original having a movie, like, having a star like McQueen, it's like, the way it sort of was unexpected to audiences back then in regards to how they did that, with his casting, but ended up being in a movie that didn't go in that direction, which probably easily could have. Well, he already made that movie with The Great Escape, but even so, it's, yeah, like I said, I think there's a certain place where, like, the epilogue works also to kind of show, like, it works better here. Like it does feel very abrupt in the first movie when he's floating off and the narration just says, "Well, this happened," the end, and then just ends really quickly. It does feel like it gives it more of like an ending for his character and closure for his character to do the epilogue that they do here, and it does work also by the fact that we do have the prologue where he wasn't in prison. So like that's kind of the one case where that tends to work. So, but yeah, overall, still it just sort of leaves you thinking like you're still asking why this was made, and it's really hard to find an answer. But you can't say they didn't try because there's definitely some quality in here. But like I said, it all just sort of comes back to other stuff, even if it's not even the original movie. So that's a bummer. So let's go ahead and end on Blindspotting, a movie that Daveed Diggs we know from Hamilton, and he was the teacher in Wonder, and his writing partner and collaborator, and I think they're like best friends in real life too, Rafael Casal, and apparently they've been working on this for like over a decade, like when the Oscar Grant stuff was happening, and the idea apparently was, and it's really tragic when you hear them talk about this, apparently the idea was to be making like sort of like something from the past. It wasn't meant to be like this whole look at what current times is. It just sort of like they wanted to hopefully write this the way it was, and then by the time they got the movie made, that it would be looking back at the way things used to be, not so much that it's the same if not amplified. So, and it just sort of turned out that way, and I wasn't quite sure what I was getting into, or even much of what it was about. It was after I saw it that I listened to the interviews and all that. But, like, the poster, at least the poster I saw was giving me, like, it sort of looked like a British crime movie, if you saw the poster that I saw, and, like, that's kind of the vibe I got from it. Obviously not that at all. I didn't know, I knew who Daveed Diggs was, but I didn't know that he was the star of it at the time either. I just saw, like, the poster from a distance. So, yeah, it is set in this area where, it does feel like the event that sort of sets it off does very much feel like the whole Fruitvale thing. Where he's on probation and he's got, like, we skip ahead, so he's got like 3 days left of this probation, so he's got to absolutely not fuck up anything at all. But of course, he's in all the wrong circles, and like everybody he knows has a damn gun, and he's just always kind of in the wrong situation. So finally, he's like by himself, and he's driving home, and he gets stopped at a red light. And just when he's about to run the red light because nobody's around, this dude comes out, a black dude, of course, because he's being he's unarmed and being chased by this cop that's Ethan Embry, and gets shot 4 times, dead. And Daveed's character, Colin, is the only witness to this. And you kind of think, the interesting thing that the movie does is you're under the impression that that's going to be the setting off point for the whole movie. It's going to, you know, shape everything that happens in the rest of the movie and what this character does. And maybe in the vaguest way that's true, but as far as the events in the movie, there is so much else going on. This is just kind of like this underlying thing that's sort of subtly, you know, sending his character in certain directions after having witnessed this and sort of having that, I would say I was going to say guilt immediately, but there's a lot of emotions going into this, and of course there's the paranoia and the fear that also goes into this, of what could happen to him, especially since his probation's only 3 more days, and it's like the repercussions if he were to go out and say, I saw a cop shoot an unarmed dude, and what would happen to him in that scenario. So that's sort of like I said, a tone setter, but there's plenty else going on in this movie, surprisingly. To where a lot of it is actually a comedy, despite the, you know, dark setup. And a lot of it involves the friendship between their 2 characters, him and Casal's character. And the interesting one of the more interesting aspects of the movie, actually, is Casal's character. Like, especially if you watch the interviews with him afterwards, it's amazing that he's the same dude as the character in this movie. Because he's sort of that ticking time bomb character, and it's like, he's the absolute worst person that Colin could be hanging out with on his last 3 days of probation. Because he's like, he can be the best and most loyal friend ever. But he's also to the point that he does a lot of things that get him in trouble, and these things seem to be increasing in how much trouble they can cause. And it gets to a point so intense that oftentimes in the movie I was starting to wonder if at some point this character was going to turn into like a full-on antagonist, despite being Colin's like best, most loyal friend. And that back and forth and the way he's able to juggle that is really impressive. Like it's amazing how well the movie pulls off its tone, given all the stuff that's going on here. Because everything I've just mentioned just now, and I haven't even gone into everything, feels like it's like it should be way off balance, right? But it goes into a whole lot of other things. It goes into like the gentrification thing. It's got like the whole, like, there's the big restaurant now is like vegan. Everybody's buying like, kale juice and shit or whatever. And it's like this town's being like overrun by, it's Oakland, but it's being overrun. This town in particular is like being overrun by this. And then, like I said, there's the whole, police abusing power thing, of course, with the Ethan Embry thing. And then, Casal actually has, like, his own sort of side thing going on here where, like, a lot of the places this character's coming from in these ways I was talking about was the fact that he's this basically white dude who has been in this neighborhood and has been raised to where there's a bit of melding in his culture here, and sometimes that's not going to go well depending on which environment he is, and just how much he's embracing it and maybe not in the best ways. So, like a scene at a party in particular, to where it's like, it's the way he doesn't fit in, it's like it jumps back and forth between being comedic and being really intense, depending on what he's doing and how the people around him are reacting to it. And there's something really interesting with his character throughout that. But that's not to take away from the fact that Diggs is also incredible in this movie also, and he's definitely, like, the lead center here, and everything. The movie, like, the tone really depends on him also, because he's really jumping around in these tones also, in a totally different way than Casal is. It's like their characters really couldn't be more different in regards to how they handle things and how they react to things. I mean, we get a slight idea of Colin, like, before the incident happened that sent him to prison, but even so, it is shown in this very interesting way, where it's sort of like Tim Roth telling the story in Reservoir Dogs, but in, like, really more heightened and stylized and all that in this really fantastic way. The movie is full of those, just these individual scenes that really, really stick out. There's one scene that's also really big in regards to tone juggling, where it's like this really... Because obviously, the gun angle is also a big portion of what the movie's trying to say. So there's this moment where the scene is actually quite light, and everybody's pretty much, content. Everybody's at home, and they're just kind of hanging out. Funny lines are being thrown around and all that. And then suddenly, there's a gun in, like, a 5-year-old's hand, and the tonal shift actually works. And it's, like, very sudden and very abrupt, but somehow finds a way to work, and the scene actually goes in that direction, like, without fault. And it's really interesting. And then you just have stuff that's so off the wall. There's a dream sequence in this movie I can't even describe that is crazy. And that's the thing, too, is while this dream sequence does stick out, there is something about the movie that it's almost sort of like it might be the movie style might sort of be counterproductive to what it's saying and the message it's trying to say, or multiple messages it's trying to say. Because while it's obviously trying to show off all these real-world problems, and just how deep they go, the whole movie feels like it's almost in this sort of heightened reality just by the way it looks. It's like it's in this whole other heightened area, where it's like there's this constant blue tint and everything feels sort of over the top in this really interesting and engrossing way, mind you, but like I said, it does feel a bit counterproductive to the whole sending the message sort of thing. But still, it really does grab you kind of through the whole way. Like, it never drops that. And there's, like, that constant sort of blue thing also, where, like, even when... There's one scene with Wayne Knight, of all people, where they're movers, so they're moving like pictures of his out of his apartment. And the room is mostly like white and bright, but even so, Wayne Knight's wearing this blue shirt. And it's like, so there's just that constant presence of blue, which could mean a number of things. Could be the police thing is immediately what you go to, but it could be a number of things depending on the whatever artistic direction they were trying to go, which really could have been anything. But and there's also this sort of it's like a countdown, because we are seeing like it's 3 days left of probation, 2 days left, 1 day left, and all that, and it's like the closer he gets to not being on probation, the closer he's getting to breaking it because of the situations he's getting into, and it does feel like this clock that's counting down that he has to beat, and so yeah, that's a nice ongoing thing throughout the movie too, to kind of give it this sense of urgency in regards to what's happening. It sort of adds to the already, you know, intensity that it's reached. And then there are cases where, like, it's, as far as it being a message movie, it's a sledgehammer, you know, because it's like, I mean, there are nuances in there, and there are subtleties in there, but I mean, I don't expect, like, that to be, it's, like, the whole time, like, it's really big on that, and not to say necessarily that that's diverts too much away from the movie, but it's, like, but there are some cases where, when they try to get the message across, it works in ways that I have really not seen in a movie yet. Like, the whole idea that, like, ever since stuff like Oscar Grant and Trayvon Martin and all that, it's like, the idea that, black people, or any minority, I guess, depending on how, you know, fucked up the dude with the gun is, but, the idea of being afraid of the cops. And there's this one particular scene that is, like, so incredibly intense, where even somebody like me can get at least the vaguest sense, as much as I can, of that feeling when he's walking down the street, and he's got, like, his back to the street, and this cop pulls up like a shark and, like, slows down. Like, he's not armed, he's not doing anything suspicious, but the cop just slows down, and there's just this, like, the score builds up, everything seems to slow down, and it's like you do get the sense that the movie's just flown right into this scene to make you think that, like, could be in danger right now, even though it's just this. And it's like, it really sort of puts you in that position in a way I don't think I've quite seen in a movie, despite how many movies have gone to this topic before. So yeah, it could benefit from being more subtle. It really could, probably, but even so, it's still... And there are moments that might seem, like, really out there that actually do find their way to fit in, like the fact that the characters rap. And there's one particular instance where we get the final scene, like the big climax, that's just this big, impassioned rap from Diggs' character, and it does, and like I said, obviously they've written this some time ago, so this was obviously just an unfortunate coincidence that it goes to this, but it's basically that video that went viral, what was that guy's name? Joyner Lucas, I think, the I'm Not Racist video, where there's a second half to that video, where the guy that's just goes off, the scenes are very similar. Like, the raps are very, very close in regards to what they're saying, and it's like, I feel like that probably would have been a much more powerful moment in the movie if I wasn't thinking, oh, this is, like, the exact same thing as that video. So, that's obviously just an unfortunate thing, and this sort of, like I said, unfortunate that they sort of seemed like they were writing for the future as opposed to a what once was thing like they were hoping for, but yeah, I also don't know, surely, you know, tweaks were made in between then and now, obviously, but still, it's, yeah, like I said, it is very well, the tones being juggled, the message is there, the performances are great, but it does feel like it seriously probably could have seriously benefited from being more subtle, as opposed to the sledgehammer that it does feel like. But even so, it is... They have created something really nice here, and the direction is great, so that's going to be this. Like I said, there's going to be another one tomorrow with 4 more, and a versus also, and then I'll probably be doing something big to finish out September if that's going the way it looks like it's going. So, yeah, so we'll just be doing this again very soon, so until then.